everybody, I'm Derek. Like Ken said, I farm with my wife Taylor and our two young daughters, so a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old. Well, I guess we'll get started. So this is called Transformational Dairying, and what we've done over the years is really have transformed. I mean, it's you've seen some really big, impressive changes. And this is my wife and her daughters, and they're little farmers too. So I've always dairied. I grew up on a dairy. We sold the cows in 2001, and then my dad switched to custom raising heifers, which he still does today. He raises for a large dairy, and then he also has beef cows. And then my wife, she grew up with some exposure to livestock. So everything she knows about dairying, I taught her. So I started working for a neighbor, and I think I made up my mind when I was probably 13 years old that dairying is what I wanted to do. I love the cows and the calves, and I just love the whole experience. So throughout high school, I worked at several dairies, mostly large conventional dairies. Where I would do things, I would milk cows, I'd learn to breed cows, learn to treat cows, and ran repro programs and things like that. After graduation, I was going to go for a dairy degree at a 2-year college at Ridgewater in Minnesota here, but it just didn't feel right. I was at the registration. I was reading through all the courses, and it just didn't sit right with me. And everybody else walked to the computer lab to sign up for classes, and I walked out the door, and I just took the long way home, just thought about what I was going to do. So on the way home, I made up my mind that I was going to just educate myself. So in doing that, I got home. Actually, I should say on the way home, I called my boss, who I was milking for part-time, and asked him if he would hire me on full-time. And I just, as soon as I got home, I ordered some books. I subscribed to a few magazines, and I just started educating myself. And then as soon as I was 2 days after I graduated high school, I started working full-time for the farm I had been milking for in high school. And I basically was the herdsman. I was in charge of pretty much everything. I got some help milking, but for the most part, the cows were my job. And this farm was in St. Joseph. And after being a herdsman there for about a year, my uncle had a dairy at the same time at a different location, and he had a health problem where he wasn't able to milk cows or take care of his farm for about a month. And I went and worked for him for a month and ran the farm as if it was my own. And I just fell in love with it. It was a small, no grain, seasonal dairy. And I just had a blast. I just couldn't believe how fun it was. And that was in June. And by August, I had bought my first heifers. And those heifers I bred them to calve the next spring and early summer. And I was on my way. I knew I wanted to, how do I say this? Run a grazing dairy at this point. I enjoyed what I did at the conventional dairying, but I got to see firsthand all the problems with everything from reproduction issues to hoof issues to all of those things. And I just knew that wasn't something that I wanted to do. But anyway, when I I talked to my boss at that farm, and I was able to build 8 tie stalls into a corner of the barn, and I was in business. That following spring, after I had purchased my heifers, I was able to buy some more grazing type cows. And I knew I needed grazing cows because I had seen a little bit of what happens when they aren't fully adapted. And I started with some good animals. So at first I was entirely spring seasonal. So some days I think I should have stuck with that, but I didn't. And my bosses at that farm where I was herdsman they're really supportive of what I did, but they were very conventionally minded, and they couldn't see, why I wanted to put fence up when they took fence out 30 years ago. It was quite the paradigm tester for them, and they were gracious enough to let me graze some of the odds and ends around the farm. It was some of it was a gravel pit that was closed poorly that had kind of grown in with grass, and there was a little swamp that I was able to put some wire in, and then there's some corners of a field that they couldn't get their equipment in decent, and the irrigator didn't hit. So it totaled about 8 acres, and that was a good learning experience for me. I started with one half broken polywire reel and 13 pigtail posts, and that was my start. And I think at that time I moved cows. I think I moved them twice a day. And I just started learning about just how to manage grass, because I hadn't spent a lot of time on other farms doing this. And like the slide says, we outwintered the cows, and we group fed calves, which it's kind of both of those things are kind of a no-no, or at the time they were a no-no in the conventional world. So during this time, I knew I wanted to see other farms, because I had made that decision that I was going to see other farms. So I talked to Kent, and Kent set me up with a few farms to go look at. Some kind of hybrid type grazing dairies, and some where those guys would feed 60% of the ration as a TMR, and then a couple guys who were just super low input, who had rules which I somewhat follow today, where they wouldn't spend $1 unless it would make them $5. And I always thought that was an interesting rule. So as you can see on the pictures, these are the little tie stalls I built, and these are some of the places I was able to graze. And this is how we outwintered cows. Just a nice big bedded pack, and we had some trees for windbreaks, and we get lots of snow. So, but they do well. There's no problem making a cow work a little bit. And also at the same time, I started selling semen, and it's not because I was any good at sales or I had any ambition to sell anything. I'm a very poor salesman, but I just wanted to see other farms, and it was a great way to do it and basically get my gas paid for. So after basically my second calving season in the spring of 2015, we got the opportunity to move about 20 miles from where we were and try and do a little expansion. So at that farm, I had I got to control some more acres. We seeded down more pasture. We started managing the pasture that was there, and then in seeding the pastures, the landowner was pretty willing to let me do what I wanted. He saw that I was passionate about it, and he was a pretty laid back guy. So, in seeding the pastures, I knew to do diverse mixes from what I'd read in things like the Graze magazine or other places. And so I believe our pasture mixes were something like a 10-way mix. At the time, we were pretty heavy on legumes, and we started planting triticale and peas with those mixes, and we grew some really great feed. It was pretty eye-opening for the owner of the farm. And then in year 2, we actually started certifying organic. That was the plan, I was going to certify organic. And so we wanted to get away from growing corn, because neither of us had any interest in cultivating corn. and then neither of us really cared for the tillage either. So that worked quite well for us. We were able to grow some small grains, feed some small grains, which I do like feeding, and grow some of our own straw. And then at the time, then we started double cropping as well. We do triticale and peas, and then we do sorghum sudan. I didn't understand at the time how important diversity is. I knew it was important, but I didn't know how important. So at that farm, we started figuring out what genetics really clicked for us, what kind of cow we needed. And this is an example of some of our earlier cows that worked pretty well for us. And then we made our first very expensive mistake, and that is when we bought the landowner's cows. So we thought they would be just fine. They were cows that were raised in a tie-style barn and things like that, but the heifers were grazed on a big continuously grazed pasture, and the cows were let out on some grass. It didn't amount to much of their ration, but they had the opportunity to eat some grass, and we thought they would be fine. But when we put them to the test, they really didn't do that well on it. And after about 3 years of being there, things just didn't work out. The landowner, we were supposed to purchase it and didn't work out. And to be honest, that we were hurting. Milk prices were low. We were feeding probably 15 pounds of grain, and things just weren't working that well. So we were able to move back to the farm that we started on because the owner had sold their cows. So when we went back to that farm, our plan was we were going to run more of a hybrid system because we weren't happy with the milk production that we were getting when we were living up north at the Elmdale farm. We thought if we went to this farm, we had access to a TMR, corn silage, I do have that on the slide. And the plan was just to basically graze for protein and then supplement with the TMR. We thought we'd graze, 30% of our intake. The pasture was irrigated, so we knew we'd be able to grow lots of forage that way. And the plan was we thought we'd milk 80 to 90 cows and buy in corn silage, and we had some land rented as well. And then we made our second expensive mistake. We thought if we're not asking too much of the cows to graze, we could, again, purchase some cows that maybe weren't perfectly adapted. And we tried that. We bought cows from the farm in St. Joe, the owner there. And it was a big flop. And these cows were totally confinement cows. And some of them were so stubborn, they literally wouldn't put their head down to eat grass. They would just go to the corner of the pasture, the closest corner to the barn, and just beller until I opened the gate to let them back to the barn. And at that farm with the TMR, I mean, it was no doubt we made a lot of milk. We were very close to an 80-pound tank average with crossbred cows. We had pretty good butter, fat, and protein, but the bills that we had were just incredible, just insane. We got some feed bills that were almost half of the milk check, and we were going broke even quicker than when we came there. It was a very trying time, but we made it through, and it was during some incredibly low milk prices. And we found out that farm, the soils were just run down. It was lots of pure alfalfa, and if it wasn't in pure alfalfa, it was in corn, and it was either corn silage or the corn was combined, corn straw was baled off, and most likely it didn't make it back to that field. We had lots of issues with compaction and just, I would say, probably poor nutrient availability. Even when applying compost to the pastures, we didn't see that great of a result from that. And it made for some really, really tight winters. Even on the rented land we had, it was things were tough. So we were at the time we were still trying to make, trying to make it work, make a bunch of money, make a bunch of milk, and try and make a bunch of money. And it wasn't working. We paid up to $340 a ton for hay. And the protein was over 30 cents a pound. And we just kind of, as a Hail Mary, we just had to flip a switch. We just ripped the Band-Aid off and we went for it. So what I did was I pulled corn levels as low as I felt comfortable with. And well, to be honest, I wasn't that comfortable pulling it that low. But we wanted to get rid of the protein bill because that was the killer, having to write out that check to the co-op. And then we were able to buy some hay with a little more grass and a little more diversity in it. And at that time, I wasn't totally aware of how important diversity was for the cow. I always liked feeding some grass, but once we got away from feeding a mostly legume hay, we were much better off. So with that, we had to sell some cows that didn't fit. And we ended up selling about 25 cows of what we had. And basically I made a line. They had to, produce above a certain level on this. And if they didn't, they had to go and they had to breed back to stay in a 12-month season. And I had a 2-strike rule for any issue a cow had. It was 2 strikes. And that protein bill going away was great. That the month after we paid the last bill, when we didn't have that, we got the milk check and we could keep most of it. We were done paying bills and there was still some left. Was amazing. It was one of the greatest feelings I've ever had. And all the problem cows were gone. We didn't have cows we had to baby or anything like that. And it made me think I should have did that years before. We would have been better off milking less, better cows. It's a big money saver. Problem cows cost a lot of money. With that, our components jumped a little bit. We gained a couple tenths in fat, a couple in protein, and we brought our somatic cell count down to about 100,000. And in selling off those unadapted cows, our genetics, our herd was much more superior than it was. And I kind of felt like this calf that thought she could jump over the cow, but couldn't quite do it. I just felt stuck and I didn't know what to do. So then in 2020, in the fall of 2019, I met John and Matthew Willenbring. And we got along well, and they had a plan to disperse their cow herd and bring a different enterprise onto the farm. They weren't exactly sure what that would be, but they knew they wanted to do something different. They had just a normal conventional herd, and they wanted to change things up. So I talked to them and got along well with them. And I had them graze some dry cows and heifers for us on there. In 2019, they started establishing the pastures, and they had some just complex covers that weren't put into perennials right away. So they grazed some heifers and dry cows for us, and they did really well. And they were able to work out some of the kinks in the system before I came there, which was great. So they were able to get the water system figured out and things like that. And they'd been using soil-friendly practices since the 70s. They did things like ridge till and minimal tillage, and especially in the last few years, they were working in a lot more diversity, and they had got rid of synthetics a few years before I came there. So it worked well coming into that system. And after meeting them a few times and talking with them, since they weren't sure exactly what they were going to do, I just offered to rent the farm, and it worked out well. And it has been working really well. So we moved there in April of 2020. And when I came to the farm, it was all fenced. About half was seeded down into perennials. And the rest we put into annuals. The farm is basically all irrigated with center pivot irrigations. They have 2 towable units with 3 stations each. And when I came there, there's no interior fences. The only interior fences are the lay-ins that run basically the length of the farm. That's the only kind of interior fence. Everything else I run with poly, and that works really well. We can shake things up pretty easily. Once we moved there, and actually before we moved there, I started feeding some of their hay when I was at the St. Joseph farm, and our cows loved it. They ate it really well, and the cows milked well on it. Things like manure consistency evened out, and that was one thing we saw a lot of at the other farm. We would buy some hay either from the landowner or some hay we made on our own. And looking at a feed test, it was exceptional feed. It'd test really well, but it just didn't feed worth a darn. So then once we got into feeding Willenbring's feed from a farm where the soils were treated better, it made a huge change in our cows. And we'd had a couple foot issues and stuff like that before, and those things just disappeared. We just didn't have those problems anymore. And Matthew was able to attend a Soil Health Academy in the fall of 2019. And then we learned about doing biological primers for a couple years before seeding perennials, and that's worked pretty well. We've implemented that, and we've seen once the perennials are seeded, they establish much better. There's a lot less of the undesirable plants in there, and it works quite well. And then I was able to attend a Soil Health Academy in June of 2020. So there at Grant and Don Breikroots, I got to just learn more about extending rest periods. And I should say I've always had longer rest periods, but that's because we're longer than the average conventional dairy, or conventional grazing dairy. A lot of them have a very New Zealand type mindset where you run a 21-day rotation, and that's what you do. And you might extend it out to 28 days, come August or September. And you just, you have 50% legumes in there, and you graze till it's gone in October, and that's it. But I always ran a little longer rotation, and I wasn't so scared of seed heads. And basically the reason I did that is I don't own, the only piece of equipment that I own is a loader tractor. And even when I, earlier on, after a couple of years after I'd started until now, that's still the only piece of equipment I own. And I couldn't justify having somebody come in there and make hay on it or whatever, just because I wanted a 20-day rotation. I would just keep grazing through once I had seed heads. And I started to realize that seed heads weren't a problem. Seed heads aren't the enemy. So after attending that Soil Health Academy, I got the confidence to extend the rest periods even longer. So then I started pushing them out to about 45 days, and they saw really good results. Manure evened out amongst the cows, and they kept body condition better. Feet were better. And at that Soil Health Academy, I got to meet some great friends. I still talk to them today. I'll still bother them when I have questions, and it's been really great having people who understand what I'm going through, because sometimes it can be a lonely world because the neighbors all think I'm weird, and that's okay. They don't have to get it right now. They'll get it eventually. So initially, like I said, we pushed it out towards 40 to 45 days. And now this year we've rested some up to 85 days. I'm grazing some right now that's rested 85 days. And the growth I have is just incredible. And the root mass underneath them is really wonderful. And next year I really would like to push them out even farther. And maybe I'll probably give 1 or 2 fields a full season rest. Because I can really see a big difference. In this summer, I gave one piece an 80-day rest, basically the whole middle of the summer. And it was a field that wasn't doing very well. Just low diversity. The plants didn't seem very healthy. And with that long rest, and then I came through and I hit it pretty hard. and flattened it all out, and with high densities, it's come back and it looks really good. We had lots of new little plants coming, and I think that's a little something we would like to try a lot more. So we used to run, pretty consistently. We'd run 100,000 pound densities, but it would vary from 60,000 to 200,000. And now I'm not scared to run higher densities, and a lot throughout the summer, especially through the heat, we'll run higher densities, and it's really made a big difference in intakes and things like that. We can keep cows eating through the heat. We don't let cows back up. We don't have any shade whatsoever on the farm. There's not a single tree inside my fence. And the cows don't seem bothered. We have to remember, when we're moving into these tall, long rested swards of grass, that grass down, by their feet, where the veins are running close to the top of their by their skin, that has a really amazing cooling effect on those cows. And then when those cows go into a tall sward, like what's in the picture there, I mean, they'll be able to fill up easily within 45 minutes. And as soon as they fill up, they'll lay down, and on that cool soil that was shaded by that grass, and that's still shaded by the trample, all the carbon that's been laid down, it really helps with the cooling of the cows. So we run the herd as one large group. I should have mentioned earlier, we have about 80 cows. We're milking somewhere in the mid 60s right now. When we're finished with fall calving, we'll be about 70 cows. And there's a bunch of nanny cows in there as well, feeding calves. So we run the milking herd, the nanny cows and their calves that are grafted onto them, and then all of our heifers as one large herd. That herd will be as much as 150 head in the middle of summer. The last couple of summers, I brought on some custom grazing heifers as well for a relative. And the only thing that'll run separate in the summer, or for part of the summer, is the bulls. Everything else is one large herd. It is, some of them end up in the holding pen at milking time, but they figure that out within 2 or 3 days, that it doesn't pay for them to come into the holding pen because they don't get anything out of it. And it takes much less time for me to sort off a couple animals in the holding pen, or just leaving them in there till the end of milking. It takes much less time to do that than it does for me to run an entirely separate group, and having to worry about their fencing and their watering. And this way it's easier to achieve higher densities. We can impact certain areas of the farm harder. We can extend rest periods because we're not grazing in two places. It makes life much easier. And not to mention the calves. I think it's so important for those calves to learn grazing with the cows. Since we started doing this a couple years ago, and I don't know who taught them, but my calves started grazing thistles about 2 years ago. And for the most part, the cattle have grazed the thistles out of the pasture. And it's been really, really interesting seeing that. We haven't tried to do any training or anything. We just let them go, and they learn. And it does seem like the calves graze, even though the calves learn from the cows, they graze a little differently from the cows. They will, they're more willing to eat. It seems they're more willing to eat more of the mature, almost woody plants, tall lamb's quarter that's 3 feet tall, bolted out chicory, thistles, curly dock, things like that. The calves seem to be really into that. And I kind of think there's probably something really important about the microbes the calves are shedding as well, because we've seen changes in the pastures since we've brought the calves into into the herd. And also since the Soil Health Academy, I've worked on extending my grazing season more. Kent told me probably 8 years ago, I was listening to Kent talk somewhere, and he mentioned that us dairy guys should really be paying attention to what beef guys are doing, because there's a lot that we can learn from what they're doing with their beef cows, such as grazing stocks and cover crops and things like that. So last year we grazed the dry cows and heifers on cover crops. I should have included a picture of the cover crops earlier. So the picture that's on the screen, for who can see it, that was a field I outwintered cows on. And then in mid-June, we seeded a complex cover crop. It was a sorghum sudan based crop, but I believe there was 18 different species in there. And with the volunteer species that were in there, there was over 25 species in that crop. We grazed it in August with the cows, and it was so dense. It was about 6 feet tall, and it was so dense that I was trying to make lanes in it to set up my wires. And I have a little Chevy tracker, Geo tracker, and it was so thick that I was choking it out driving through that I had to use my tractor to make paths through so I could set up my wires. And we really grew some incredible feed on there. So we grazed in August, and then we started grazing that again in November after the perennials had run out for the heifers. And it worked exceptionally well. I mean, you could see in the picture that the feed doesn't look to be very high quality. It looked like I was grazing corn straw. But they did really well on it. We gained probably 1.5 pounds a day on the heifers is what I guess they did on it. And I think there was just enough of the brassicas in there to provide enough protein, because I didn't have any issues with them being, pooping like horses. There was plenty of protein there. So they did really, really well on it. And the dry cows maintained perfect condition. And the heifers grew well enough on it. So I think with being very intentional when we're seeding these cover crops, or for ourselves, or maybe we can work with neighbors or things like that, I think we can graze 9 months a year in Minnesota. I think it's possible. Well, we did it last year. In the spring of last year, we had, from a cover crop from the previous year, there was some Italian ryegrass that lived, and that started growing in April. So we started grazing heifers in early April in the spring of 21. And that saved a lot of hay and provided some really good protein for them, which we were a little short on protein in our hay. So it worked really well. And we tried to graze that Italian ryegrass to terminate it, to put in our perennial seedings, and it worked okay, but maybe we needed more density on it to have an effect. So the last winter, these heifers and dry cows out here grazing, we grazed them for 61 cents a day, which if I would have been, as soon as the pasture ran out and I started feeding them, I was at about $2.35 a day. And they were actually able to get their water off that snow. If we had soft snow, they wouldn't come up for water. So that worked really well too. And here's a couple more pictures. And then you can see how, brown and dead that looks, but it works really well. And then as soon as we run out of pasture to graze, I should also mention that the cows, we were able to graze those on the perennial pastures into, I believe it was December 14th or 24th. We were able to keep that as 25% of their ration until then, which is another big savings. We can grow our forage to, it costs me about $55 a ton to grow pasture. Anytime I put it into bale form, I'm about $160 to $165 a ton. So I really try and keep that in mind and manage my pastures very, very well because it all makes a difference. So after we run out of grass, we switch to bale grazing. So in the picture here, I was just setting out bales, and this is only part of what I would set out. I would take a whole hay rack, and I fed 10 bales at a time. And I would have fed more at a time, but 10 was all I could fit on my hay rack. And it works really, really well. I was able to save $320 a week in fuel savings and labor savings and tractor savings. I can leave a lot of, if you're worried about quote unquote wasting hay, you can leave a lot of hay on the ground for that. And waste is minimal. Most goes through the animals eat most of it, especially once they're used to it. So for the heifers, we'll pre-place bales, and then for the cows, I roll them out twice a day. I'll roll out for the cows. The reason I do it twice a day is if I do it less, I just don't get the intakes I want, and I don't get the production I want. For the cows, it seems to pay, but maybe I could roll out a few days at a time, and move across those rolled out bales with a wire. I mean, that could work quite well too. This is another thing we implemented in 2018. In 2018 with the low milk prices, and I was really busy with doing all the chores. My wife got a part-time, well, actually it was almost a full-time job in town, and I was running my butt off. And it happened one day, I was milking cows, and I milked a cow into a bucket, and I had a group of calves in the barn. I detached the bucket from the unit. I turned around and I dumped the bucket into a group feeder for the calves. And I just about hit myself. I was like, what are you doing this for? It just didn't make sense. So after, I think that evening, I put calves on the cows, and it worked really well. So now we bond them, calves and nanny cows separate for a few days. We'll just bring the calves out to the cows, and then I like to have them live together, just those two calves and that cow, for about 10 days, and then they'll go out with the group. And we've had really good luck with that. And so the cows we use for nanny cows are high somatic cows with attitudes, udders who aren't great, three-teater cows, things like that work perfect for raising calves on. And it works good if the cow is recently fresh. That's why spring and fall seasonal calving or seasonal type calving work best. Maybe not best, but they work well for this kind of management. And it's actually pretty economical. I can feed that cow for, 50 cents a day or 60 cents a day on grass, and I have two calves on her. And after a while, they start eating grass too, but it works. It works pretty well. And we've been leaving the calves on for about 6 months. We do want to push that longer. I'd like to push that to 8 months, especially as more of our nanny cows are sticking around year after year. It only makes sense to keep that cow working, paying her bills since she's there. And after a while, it doesn't matter how much milk the calf gets after a few months. The milk is more like an inoculation at that point. So if you see the pictures, the calf on the right standing by that bale, she's only 5 months old, and she's almost as tall as that's a 4 foot tall bale of baleage. So we've been getting some exceptional growth. And we do 2 calves a cow. We've tried 3. It just seems like there's not enough love to go around. I tried that last year. And by fall, the calves had stolen enough cows out of the herd that we were back to 2 calves per cow. And if the calves are bonded well, this year we have no calf sneaking milk. They're all sticking to their nannies, and it's working really well. So with raising calves on nannies or on their mother, we feel we get superior epigenetics that way, or we know we get superior epigenetics that way. And we're raising that calf exactly as a calf is supposed to be raised. And we were able to raise calves without grain this way. And I feel that's pretty important in developing a good calf for grass. And we also, probably 4 years ago, I read a study, I believe it was by Randy Wiederman, and the if I remember right, the gist of the study is they took two groups of beef cows. They fed one a low energy ration and one a higher energy ration. And the calves out of the cows with the lower energy ration had lifetime higher performance. They were more efficient and just ended up, and they lived longer. So we've been implementing that with dry cows as well. So we dry cows off and we try to dry them off in great condition and then kind of have them coast through the dry period on rougher forage, and it works quite well. Which brings me to adapted genetics. So we use our own bulls as much as possible. We are still AIing some. We find it pretty difficult to find great grass-fed genetics, so we have to make them ourselves. We raise all our own heifers. We will buy cows. We have bought cows when we expanded. We'll do that occasionally. So right now we're shooting for an 1,100 pound cow that can make great quality milk, low somatic cell count, I say the goal is about a 4 or 5 butter fat and a 3-2 protein, 3-4 protein, but I think that can be raised some. I don't have a slide on it here, but we started milking our cows once a day. So that's a new thing we're selecting for. As of now, it seems about 10% of our cows won't take to once a day well. So some of those will call, and then some of those will just raise calves next year. So like as far as production now, I think on once a day milking year round, I think we'll make about 9,000 pounds of milk, maybe 8,500, but I think we can do 9,000. And that's with no grain whatsoever. And I think in doing that, I think we'll be able to average over a 4.5% fat and a 3.5% protein throughout the year. So far, that's been working pretty well, but take that with a grain of salt. This is an experiment I'm trying, and I've heard a lot about it in Ireland and New Zealand. And I was just a little, I'm too big to do it myself, and I'm too small to hire somebody to help. And my wife helps when she can, but she's pretty busy with the little kids. So this is pretty much a one-man show. And that's why I hire in all my field work, and I stick with the cows as much as I can. I don't enjoy equipment, and I shouldn't be allowed around equipment. I'm not great at running it. So I just stick with the cows. And so far with the once a day milking, we've seen even better reproduction, better body condition, better grazing. So far, I really like it. Not saying I never will go twice a day milking again, but it's working really well. I really enjoy it. So this is what we've been seeing. So we've never had a DA or ketosis. We've always fed long stem hay. I think it makes a big difference. We try to cut calf cows in good condition. We don't push very hard. Even when we did push harder, I have a knack for watching cows, so I probably prevented some of those things, but it's just nice not having to worry about those things. So over the last probably 5 years, calving, we've only had to assist in about 2% of the births. Most of the calves are up in 15 minutes. We've seen some calves up in less than 10 minutes, and they're up and they're drinking, and they're just healthy from the start. Ever since we switched to nanny cows, we don't see any scours in the calves on nanny cows. I don't think we've had any we haven't had any respiratory illness at all in the calves. And how we're starting those calves and where we're bonding them, that's in an open-sided monoslope building. It's perfect air, great air for the calves. And we're not calving in the tougher times of the year. We're not calving in the middle of summer, and we're not calving in the middle of winter. So it's the easy times of the year to do it. And we haven't had any death loss on any calves or heifers since we switched to nanny cows. So I will say sometimes we're still cash poor. This farm is in transition. And it's not like other dairy farmers aren't. It's tight. But I think we've turned a corner in the last 2 years, and things are becoming much easier. We're growing a lot more of our own feed. But the first year I came to Willen Rings, we made about 400 bales of baleage, and I grazed about 50 cows. The second year I grazed 60 cows plus I believe about 15 custom heifers, and we made about 400 bales of baleage. And this year we've grazed 85 cows, all of our heifers as well, 9 custom heifers, and we made 380 real big bales of baleage, probably equivalent to 450 bales of baleage. So we're growing more feed year after year, and we don't grow all of our feed. We buy some on purpose, because for a lot of times I can buy hay cheaper than I can make it, plus the fertility I'm bringing in with that hay. We're excited to see that some of our neighbors are starting to use cover crops. They aren't using it right up against the farm yet, but I think they will in a couple of years. And there is some talk about them putting in some kerns up pretty close to us, so we may be able to graze that as well. And like I said earlier, what Kent had told me, that we need to watch what these beef guys are doing. There's just a lot of opportunity there. There's a bunch of really great videos on outwintering, Alberta ag videos on YouTube, and YouTube University has been part of my schooling, I guess you could say. So everything we do, we put it up against what I call the 634 test. Everything is evaluated. So I look at how it will affect my resource and how will it affect my cash flow. And I don't do any experiments where I shouldn't say that. I'll do small experiments that I could lose money on, but for the most part, I won't spend $1 unless it makes me $2 at least. I try not to fall for any of the I don't know, miracle potions or whatever you want to call them, where you spend $1 and hopefully you make $1.10. I don't do any of that. It's all just, I know we can improve our resource with good grazing management, being being very observant, and with the right adapted cattle. This isn't rocket science. This can be simple. And we've created a support system to help us through this. I had some great friends I met when I attended a Soil Health Academy. I have some great friends. We hosted a Soil Health Academy in 2021. I have some great friends I met there that I still talk to this day. It's just great talking to somebody who's just super passionate about regen ag as I am. So we created a regenerative dairy grazing group. We've met once so far, and we have some structure to it. We run it through the Minnesota Dairy Initiative, so it's a peer group through them. I'm sure most states have the opportunity to do something similar. So we do this to create deliberate conversation about what we're doing, to get eyes on each other's farms. And there's a lot of things on your farm that you don't see. You're just doing your day-to-day things, and you don't notice things. So it's great getting somebody on there, somebody on your farm and questioning the why behind any certain practice. It really makes you think. And we're also, for a few years, I've been a mentor through the Dairy Grazing Apprenticeship. And we have a good relationship with them. And I try to attend all the events that I can. It's just another opportunity to get on people's farms. And we also have a team, just my farm has a team also through the Minnesota Dairy Initiative. And that just helps give us structure. We want to improve, and I want somebody to give me deadlines, and again, seeing an outside pair of eyes coming in to give us ideas. And in the future, we're excited we would love to see some type of regen dairy market. Currently, we ship to a conventional market, and we do sell some raw milk off the farms. In the next few years, now that the system is working better, we'd like to create a satellite farm, something like this one on another farm in the area, and give somebody else the opportunity, maybe a journeyman from the dairy grazing apprenticeship or something like that, who wants to farm and could use the structure and the place to do it. I wish I would have had something to get started with like this, because I had to learn a lot of tough lessons, and the lessons can be good things, but some of them are expensive. They don't have to make all the expensive mistakes. So we want to rebuild our dairy community. We're in the biggest dairy county in Minnesota, and we have to go a few miles to find another dairy farm. And there used to be cows on every quarter section around here. There was a dairy herd, and that's not the case anymore. So I really want to rebuild that and work on rebuilding our and build our genetics as well. We kind of have this idea to kind of build our own breed with our cows, since we've had to create what we want. So and next June 20th through 23rd of 2023, we will be having a Soil Health Academy here. So come on out, see how this works, meet some friends. It's really great time, and I think everybody learns a lot. And that should be it.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Derek. We really, really appreciate that. Folks, if you have questions, just a reminder, go to the bottom center left of your screen. It says Q&A on the bottom. Click on that and you can type your questions in that. And we've got some questions here already. I want to introduce Doug Voss, one of our other consultants here at Understanding Ag. He's going to be available to answer questions also if necessary, but I'm sure most of these are going to be directed at Derek. And so let's get going with those. The first one here is from Willie. Derek, he says, could you provide the contact details for the regenerative grazing group?
So at this point, it's just, it's a local group. We wanted to keep it smaller and local. So I would encourage you to do something like this with people in your area, if that's possible. We wanted to keep it local, just so the contexts are somewhat similar as far as climate, things like that. So that's what we're working on now. Maybe in the future we'll do something else, but that's what we're working with now.
Excellent, thank you. There's another question here. You quoted 61 cents per head per day for heifers and dry cows. What's all included in that cost, Derek?
So that was, we did do a little tillage before that because we had some ruts from feeding out there that previous winter. So that was a little bit of tillage, the seeding, and then my labor and fencing and irrigation. And that was all included. It was 61 cents. How I figured that is when we grazed in August, the regrowth was about 80% of the initial growth, and that's how I charged that 61 cents back to the fall cattle on there. The winter grazing, I should say.
Very good. Another question here from Ben. It says, you mentioned that it was hard for you to find good grass-fed genetics, so you're creating your own. What breeds are you using to do this, and what is your selection criteria for bulls?
So you have to figure out what works best for you, but I'll tell you what we've found for the size cow we need. So for where we are here, a Jersey cow doesn't have quite enough meat to make it through the winters, especially when we're out wintering. Just too small of a cow. We have to have a cow over 1,000 pounds. If they're under that, they just hunch up as soon as the wind blows. And we use for the first, I think 6 years I farmed, we use exclusively Fleck feed, and then and that could have just been my bull selection. it was probably just my bull selection. We just ended up with too big of a cow. So we've selected down from there. So we brought Jersey back in, and then there's probably a shorter list of breeds we don't have represented than ones we do have represented. So what we're finding is about a 50-50 Jersey Flexi cross. And you can use, there's a lot of breeds or combinations of breeds that would work. We are using a little bit of Norwegian Red too. And we're using the Jersey and Norwegian Red because it's easier to bring in polled genetics. We're shooting for polled and A2. So it's easier to bring those in through those herds. So what we're shooting for is that 1,100, maybe 1,200 pound cow. We'll see what selects itself over the next couple of years, but that's what's working now. And then as far as homebred bulls, they have to come out of a cow who's calved on time and has above average, but no outlier. We don't select for outliers. So slightly above average milk production, slightly above average butter, fat, and protein. No far outliers there. We're not looking for that. And we'll keep extra bulls. And then once they're maybe 8 months old or something like that, I'll look through them. And then whoever I don't like will get a band. And that'll go to our grass-fed steer program.
Derek, do you take consideration how many lactations that cow has had when you're going into bull selection?
Yes and no. I like to see a couple lactations, but I heard some breeders say one time, you got to think of the cows behind that cow and think of them as a pen of cows. And would you want to milk that pen of cows? So yes, I do like them to have a couple lactations, but if I know there's consistency there, I'm not nearly as worried from consistency from both sides, from the sire side and from the dam side.
Very good. We have another question from Ryan. Ryan asks, when grazing headed out grasses with the milking cows, what % of the available dry matter are the cows eating to maintain acceptable production?
It depends. It really depends what I'm trying to address with my grazing. A lot of times, probably 30%. That's, when we have grass heads, that's probably what we're taking. But sometimes we may only take 10%. But most of the time, it's probably more like that 30%. And now, once we quit feeding grain, we quit having cows refuse grass heads. They'll eat them first. They'll go for the grass heads. I'm not worried about that at all. They don't bother me at all.
Karen asks, explain group fed calves and what hours are the calves nursing?
Well, when we group fed them, that was just on mob feeders or nipple bars, milk bar, peach teeter, any of those. And we would, however many nipples we had, we'd group them on to that, or a couple calves less than how many nipples we had. So we did that. So now the calves are on the cow 24/7. They're on all the time.
Very good. Another question here. Any interest in pursuing organic again?
Maybe. I like to be, it's convenient to be able to buy hay from a neighbor, or there's a hay auction 20 miles from me. I can go buy hay and straw from there. The convenience is worth a lot. And I don't know, the cost of certifying and headaches, I don't know how much of a gain I would get, but I'm not opposed to it. If the right market would present itself, maybe. And I'm on a rented farm. Now to say I go purchase a farm, I can't have cows on there for 3 years. I mean, that's another consideration. I have to have the chances I can buy an organic farm are slim when that time comes.
Very good. Remember, if you have a question, go down to the lower left-hand side of the screen and type your question in there. Derek, you've been doing nurse cows or nanny cows for a few years now. Mm-hmm. Some of those animals are, in the milking string.
Yep.
Now. What are go over some of the biggest differences you're seeing between those and some of your older animals that have been around for a while?
Yeah, so we have some in second lactation now, towards the end of their second lactation, or the second half of it. We're seeing better body condition scores, lifetime. One thing I found really interesting at first is much more even milk production. They don't have, they're much more persistent. We used to have heifers that would come in and they would try and peak milk at 70 pounds, and then they would drop down to 25, 30 pounds for the rest of lactation because I wasn't feeding for that kind of production. And now we'd have heifers come in, and when we were twice a day, peak at closer to 30 pounds and 40 pounds rather, and just hold a lot closer to that for their entire lactation. That's been good, and that helps with breed back. They're not dumping out, you're not losing so much weight. I think it helps butter fat and protein levels. We really like that. But now, one thing with once a day is when we switched to once a day with the cows, we switched in July. I'll just mention this: we lost 18% of our volume, but only 8% are in pounds of components. But the heifers, there's much bigger loss there on heifers. Heifers, you lose, I think, more like 40%. And we knew that would happen. And then part of the reason we did it switch this year is because we didn't have so many heifers. Last year we calved in a lot of heifers. I knew that was going to happen. I studied a lot of there's entire once a day conferences on YouTube from Ireland, once a day milking conferences. And there's a lot of stuff available from New Zealand too. And Dairy NZ has a lot of stuff. So I knew what was happening. I've been looking into this for a few years, and in July, we just decided to pull the trigger, and it worked.
Great. We got a question from Catherine here. Do you lead feed your cows before calving, or how do you handle their nutrition around calving? Thank you.
So I move the dry cows. I try to move the dry cows in with the milking cows about 10 days before they calve, maybe 7 days. And the heifers, I try to do about 2 weeks before I'll move them in. So they'll start getting better hay and baleage then. And I don't necessarily do that so they can get better feed. I do it because I think it's important for them to rework their pecking order. I never like turning a fresh cow in with the milking herd because they just get the snot beat out of them for a couple of days. And I just don't like that. It works much better. It's a lot less stressful on everybody. And that's another thing with the once a day and just farming regeneratively like I am now. It's so much less stress on the cows just from a health perspective. It's less stress on me too. And I've with the once a day milking, I would think it's similar to in robot barns. They make the most milk on Sundays, or on weekends rather, because nobody's in the barn bothering the cows. And that seems to be with the once a day milking too. The cows have calmed down. They're not worried about me coming to chase them home. That's only once a day and they want to go home. And it's not a problem at all. They really do well on it. They've really mellowed out, I guess I could say.
Brian asked, you mentioned that 10% of the herd is not making the adjustment to 1X milking. Well, is that milk quality problems or milk production issues or something else?
Mm-hmm. It's just production. As far as milk quality, our Schmitz is up about 20. Right now, I think we're sitting at like 130,000 for Schmitz. Normally we run 100,000. That's pretty normal. So it's up a little. But the cows that aren't doing well on once a day, they're just drying off early. just in the last, I knew it was going to happen eventually. In about the last week or 2 weeks, we've seen them start drying off, quitting early. The nice thing, and I think there's a gain to be made here, is they're in really nice condition. So when they go to town, or if we can process them and have them processed and sell them as grass-fed beef, they're in great shape. So that's a nice added benefit. I mean, we're going to probably get another, close to $100 a cow, just if they were to go to town. So that makes a difference.
Question, Derek, on your milking setup. How are you set up to do your milking?
Right now it's just a flat parlor. It's I suppose it's called double 6 flat parlor.
Okay. Good. Do we have any other questions from the audience here? All right. Well, with that, I want to thank you all for coming. We especially want to thank Derek for sharing his story and so much that he's learned over the years and the transition to get to where he's at today. Again, he invited everyone out to the Soil Health Academy that's going to be hosted at his place in the Willenbring Farm on June 20th through 22nd, 2023. So check that out on the Soil Health Academy website. And we might have, let's see, we got a couple thank yous here. So again, thank you very much, Derek, and all of you for joining. From all of us at Understanding Ag and Soil Health Academy, we hope you have an excellent evening. Take care all. Bye.